Well, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jane Lomison. I'm a Master Gardener of Napa County, and want to thank you for joining us for our library talk for March. We bring you these library talks the first Thursday of every month, and this is in partnership with the Napa County Library. Our topic tonight is agaves, and agaves are more than tequila and century plants. And Olga Moram is going to be our speaker. But before we begin, I'd like to turn it over to our partner at the Napa County Library, and that's Stephanie Pravik. Stephanie?
Thank you. Welcome to tonight's program, and thank you for being here. My name's Stephanie Pravik, and I work on the reference staff at the Napa City County Library at the main library in downtown Napa. Now, gardening in our area, particularly in recent years, has encouraged us to think about water conservation more seriously. Two books that I find interesting are Designing with Succulents by Deborah Lee Baldwin and Striking Succulent Gardens by Gabriel Frank. Both books offer numerous alternatives to the traditional lawn and flower bed landscapes. Striking Succulent Gardens offers step-by-step instructions for a dozen different gardens. It offers practical ideas, simple gardening and landscape concepts, along with profiles of succulents and how to grow them. Both books included basic information for planting and preparing your garden, with Baldwin's Designing with Succulents offering a bit more detailed information with regard to basic landscaping design, and it includes a greater profile of succulents to consider for your garden. I enjoyed reading through both books and looking at the images in each one of them. I find, as I become more and more familiar with succulents, they start to grow on me, and I recognize the beauty and the idea of having a succulent garden in this area can be a beautiful element in our homes. I would encourage you to look over both these books if you are considering making a change to your garden landscape. You won't be disappointed. Both books are available for checkout at the Napa County Library. And I also want to invite you to our succulent swap. We're going to be having it at the library, the main library in downtown Napa, 580 Coombs Street, on Saturday, this Saturday, March 9th. And the swap will take place between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. So bring your succulents that you would like to give away and take some home. That's what it's all about. And there will be Master Gardener on hand to answer questions regarding succulents. So sit back and enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie. Just a reminder, we have a few more housekeeping items. Just a reminder as well, who we are. We're the UC Master Gardeners of Napa County. We're volunteers, and we are trained by the University of California. Basically, we are non-paid educators. Our goal is to educate throughout the community on sustainable landscaping practices and other home horticulture requirements. And the next slide, please. And you will receive a survey from the University of California after you have participated in any of our workshops. If you do not want to receive this survey, please put your name in the chat now, and we will remove your name from that survey. We do hope that you will take the survey, though, because it's important to us. Those surveys help us to determine what topics are important to you and how we can improve the quality of our program. So we would encourage you to please take that survey. Just a couple things. If you have joined, please mute yourself and turn off your video. And then also any questions that you have along the way, please put them in the chat, and we will have some question and answers at the end of Olga's presentation. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Olga, and she's going to talk about agave. Thank you, Olga.
Hi there. Before we start, let me just say that this presentation is being recorded and it will be on our website in a few days. So please don't worry about taking notes or pictures. Just sit back and hopefully you will enjoy. So, what exactly is a succulent? A succulent is any plant that stores moisture in fleshy leaves or stems in order to survive periods of drought. Some succulents, such as cacti, store the water only in the stem. They have no leaves, or else their leaves are very small. Other succulents, such as agave, store water mainly in their leaves. The broadest way to categorize succulents is by their dormancy season. Here's a helicopter view to show where the various succulent species fit into the bigger picture. I found so many different species names and classifications. This chart captures the essence, but I know a few names are missing. Succulents are defined by their dormancy season. And dormancy is a period in a plant's life when its growth and activity is temporarily slowed down. Basically, it's going into a deep sleep, like a bear in hibernation. Some are dormant in the winter, while others are dormant in the summer. And it's important that you be aware of your plant's dormancy period, because it's not at all beneficial to try to repot, water, or fertilize while the plant is in its deep sleep. You can see that agave, cacti, echeveria, and euphorbia are dormant in the winter, whereas aeonium, aloe, and others are dormant in the summer. Just to give you a sense of scale, there are approximately 200 varieties of agave. There are 2,000 different kinds of cacti, 150 echeveria, and 650 aloe. So the subject of succulents is a huge topic. But tonight we are going to focus on the agave species. My love affair with agave started during the drought years. I live in a country setting, and the deer were eating everything in sight. Plants that they hadn't bothered with before were suddenly fair game. And I had heard or read that succulents were deer resistant. So I planted what I considered to be the most beautiful succulents. I planted some Echeveria everglow and some black rose aeonium. Well, this didn't work out all that great. The deer chomped on the tender leaves and pulled them right out of the ground. Next, I tried some sempervivum. They have these rough little thorny edges. Well, 2 days later, they were chewed down to the ground. I realized I needed a different strategy, not just any old succulent. I needed something tough. I needed something with ragged, toothy edges. I needed something with spikes. Aha! In the agave species, I'd found the answer to my deer problem. Most agave have spikes, thorns, or teeth, and the deer don't touch them. The fact that these plants require little water or fuss is a big bonus. But as I became more familiar with the agave species, I developed a much greater appreciation and became fascinated. Each rosette is perfectly symmetrical. For example, look at this agave Leopold, or this blue flame. the mathematical precision as the leaves spiral around the center point. And they are beautiful, as if someone hand-painted a piece of fine-bone china. This cream spike is in my garden, and every time I look at it, I'm amazed. And the agave Queen Victoria Regina, considered by many to be the most beautiful agave, also looks as if someone hand-painted the leaves. As I mentioned, there are approximately 200 different species of agave. The ones that I'm going to talk about are easy to grow in our climate. They are readily available to you. Actually, I've taken all these pictures, well, 99% of them, in my garden, in my neighborhood, at the Ruth Bancroft Gardens in Walnut Creek, and even some at the Napa Library. There are so many fabulous options for you to choose from, varieties that you may have seen but never knew were agave. Some have leaves as thin as needles, such as this striata. Others have leaves the shape of spaghetti straps, such as this Gemini flora. Other varieties have very broad leaves, such as the whale's tongue. This particular plant is in the Ruth Bancroft Garden, and these leaves are 15 inches wide. Of course, there are all sorts of agave leaf sizes in between. Some varieties have these curly threads along the edges of the leaves, like this Filifera. Leaf colors range from blue to bluish to blue-gray. Foxtail is one of my favorite agaves. It is also one of the few agave that is known to be shade tolerant. There are also variegated ones with yellow striping, such as the Lophantha quadricolor, and others with white striping, like this white striped century plant. Many varieties have teeth along the edge of their leaves and a very sharp terminal spine. That is the spiky point at the tip of each leaf. Check out this Agave horrida. It's pretty scary looking, isn't it? And here's another one with some serious teeth. Also notice the bud imprints on the leaves. These are the relief patterns remaining from the tightly packed buds before the leaves unfurl. They leave an impression and a beautiful pattern on the leaves. Here's another example of bud imprint. The leaves were so tightly compacted in the growing tip that the teeth have left imprints on both surfaces, creating complex patterns. These unique features make the agave popular and highly prized with succulent collectors and landscape designers. But there are also agave that have flopping leaves and no teeth or terminal spines, such as this Bracteosa calamar. And then there is a plant that is beautiful and arching, like this variegated Desmetiana, commonly known as the smooth agave. It is also sometimes referred to as the friendly agave, but I took a chance and planted it anyways, and so far the deer have not been attracted to it. Thank goodness. It seems to be very prolific and has been sending out lots of pups constantly since I got this plant. Some leaves are all skinny and wiggly, like the Mangave snow leopard and the Mangave desert dragon. Mangave is a hybrid between a Manfreda and an agave, and it's a relatively new species. Previously, Manfreda was an agave species all unto its own. The leaves are wiggly and grow low to the ground. They spread in a clumping fashion. I'd read that the desert dragon leaves die back during the dormant season, but this didn't happen in my garden over this past winter. Agave come in all sizes. This is something you need to be aware of when selecting your plant. How big will it be at maturity? Does it grow fast, or is it a slow grower? If it grows fast, remember those teeth and those terminal spines. That may make it quite difficult to remove that plant. This is a picture of my colleague, who is 5'4", standing in front of this Atrovirens, which is well over 7 feet tall and wide. This specimen is about 40 years old. I'm talking about the agave, of course. I'll be showing you a few examples of each agave size category. Remember though, each plant's eventual size and maturity rate will depend on the amount of sunlight and water it receives, and the type of soil that it's growing in, and whether it's growing in a planter or in the ground. Here are just a few examples of the extra small size, or miniatures. At maturity, the rosette is about 12 inches in diameter. These can be planted in the ground, but they also make ideal plants for pots because of their small size. The potaterum is commonly known as the butterfly agave. It is very compact and tight growing. Blue-gray leaves with dangerous dark brown spines. It is very drought tolerant, and it is a solitary plant, meaning that it puts out none or very few pups. The Leopold is really fascinating. Narrow leaves with white margins and showy curling fibers. It is a hybrid, and it spreads in a clumping fashion. The compact Queen Victoria is a miniature version of the Victoria Regina, and it's beautiful and slow growing, and it rarely sends out pups. And of course, there's the cream spike. It's a favorite of mine and a special beauty. A rosette, which grows to 3 feet in diameter, is considered a small agave. You may plant one as a solitary in a large planter, but they are also suited for in-ground planting. The agave Perry is a very popular species, commonly known as the artichoke agave. There are numerous cultivars, all having striking forms. It does well in part shade, and it sends out pups, but not that many. The Lophantha is available in plain or variegated, as the one shown here. It is very striking and distinctive. Mine are very prolific, sending out lots of pups all year long. The attenuata, also known as the foxtail, is beautiful and also very popular, and is one of the few agave that is known for its shade tolerance. The one shown here is variegated. They don't send out many pups, but the pups that they do send out are normally attached to the base of the mother plant. And the blue glow has a gorgeous glow along the edges and is a standout solitary plant. And it has become very popular in local gardens. Here's another page of small varieties. 3 feet in diameter is a very good size for many garden situations. There are several cultivars of the Agave Queen Victoria variety. I love the following description by author Greg Starr. Easily recognizable by the dark green leaves, each lovingly hand-painted by the agave gods with the decorative white bud prints. Doesn't that say it all? Then there's the Agave horrida. It's a relatively new species, introduced to the United States in the 1990s. It's a pretty tough and scary looking plant, and it's odd that I don't have one of these in my garden yet. It's a solitary plant, doesn't send out many pups. The Gemini flora is a moderately fast-growing plant. It has narrow, unarmed leaves that are flexible. The leaves, often hundreds of them, form a rounded rosette like a globe. And when the plant flowers, it will form pairs of flower on the stalk, hence the name Gemini flora. And this is a solitary plant. The Shitagera cultivar shown here is called the royal flush, and it is sometimes referred to as the queen of white thread. It is really beautiful. Mine is like tiny, tiny right now. And I hope it grows larger, and it's a solitary plant. The Bracteosa in general is a slow-growing plant and sends out very few pups. The leaves are pale, green, toothless, and spineless. And this one is also known to be shade tolerant. Medium-sized plants are ones whose rosettes top out at 3 to 4 feet in diameter. The Agave americana are typically large or very large plants, but this particular cultivar, the white stripe, is a smaller cultivar and grows to only 3 to 4 feet. And this plant sends out a lot of pups all year long. The Sebastiani is a medium growth plant and often suckers from the base to form clusters. The Desmetiana is graceful, fast growing, and sends out lots of pups. The large and extra large size are beyond 4 feet. And you really should think carefully when you plant these. Give them the room that they'll need and consider if they have teeth and or terminal spines, and if they're going to be near a path or a walkway. As I mentioned, they may be a real challenge to move or remove when you decide to. The Agave americana is commonly known as the century plant. It is the most common agave in cultivation. It is very hardy and very prolific, sending out many pups. And if you plant one of these, be prepared to pull those pups. The Guilangola, this large plant, has very few massively thick, very broad leaves that taper down to a brown terminal spine, and it is a solitary plant. The Weberi is an elegant plant. It has no teeth along the leaf margins, but does have spine tips. And the Ovatifolia, wow, this is a monster, but it is a beautiful monster, and it never fails to evoke a wow. And it is a fast-growing plant. It could grow up to a foot per year. It likes a little shade in the hot sun, and it benefits from extra summer water in the hot weather. It was discovered in 2001 in the high limestone mountainous regions of Mexico, and it is a solitary plant. It does not send out pups. And the Franzosini has large, beautiful, undulating and twisting blue-gray leaves. So that sort of gives you a cross-section, an overview of all the various types that are fairly common in the area. Most agave are monocarpic, meaning that they flower once and then they die. This is where the term century plants comes from. Although it may seem like 100 years for the plant to mature and flower, It's more like 10 to 35 years for most plants. And as the plant approaches maturity, it stores up great quantities of sugars and starch that fuel the rapid growth of a huge flowering structure. The structure is called an inflorescence, and it grows out of the center of the rosette. It grows fast. It could be up to 3 inches per day, and it is usually massive compared to the plant that grows it. There are 2 types of inflorescences, and this is the fundamental division between the 2 types of agave. The kind that have a branching inflorescence, as shown in the left picture, and the kind that have a non-branching inflorescence, as shown in the right-hand side. The one on the right is a Queen Victoria. I think the inflorescence was about 40 feet tall. I had to lay flat on my back to capture the entire thing in my picture frame. Agave flowers are mostly yellow in color. Here are some closer views of that flowering stalk of the Queen Victoria. Agave are winter dormant, so their growing season is spring and summer. And when they flower, it's normally during June, July, or August. And when I took this picture, there were thousands of bees swarming all around the inflorescence, pollinating the flowers. The seeds from these flowers scatter in the wind and are one of the methods of propagation. And I'll be talking more about propagation in a few slides. I found this scene to be really interesting. On the left, there are 2 agave that are almost identical. The one in the front was in bloom last year when I took the picture. And the one behind it, sort of tipping over a little bit, had bloomed the previous year. And here on the right-hand side is a close-up. It has started to die. And it's interesting to note that sometimes it takes a year or 2 to completely die. The rosette starts to dry out. Sometimes in death, an agave can be quite colorful, turning shades of red, yellow, or orange as the chlorophyll breaks down. People have asked, if I cut the stalk when it starts to grow, will it save the plant? The answer is a simple no. I'm sorry. The plant has reached maturity and is now devoting all its energy towards the inflorescent, and the rosette is going to start to die whether the stalk is cut or not. The picture that I showed earlier with my colleague, that agave is almost 50 years old and it still hasn't flowered. One last comment about inflorescence. They're not always sturdy enough to stand erect. Actually, the agave foxtail is named for its fuzzy inflorescence that curls down like a fox's tail. I took these pictures at the library last August, and there were a few interesting things that I wanted to mention about these pictures. The one on the left, there's a sign identifies this blue glow as a small agave. And even after all this time, I still find it interesting to look at a plant that's 3 feet across and call it small. The middle picture shows one of the agave in bloom, and that inflorescence was about 15 feet tall. And the photo on the right shows that the leaves have started to turn yellow as the chlorophyll is breaking down and the rosette's beginning to die. As I mentioned earlier, one of the agave reproduction methods is by the thousands of seeds from the flower stalks being scattered by the wind. This is called sexual reproduction because the flowers are pollinated and seeds are produced. these offsprings will be genetically different from the parent. In these pictures, you can see agave reproducing by sending out little clones. These varieties are called offsetting. Some produce clones in a clumping fashion, while others produce one pup at a time. Some clones are attached to the base of the mother plant, or others may be bulbils that develop on the stalk, whereas others grow at the end of an underground stem. So this method is called vegetative or asexual reproduction. So just to make a special note, there are varieties that do not produce many pups, or literally very few pups, and they are called solitary or non-offsetting. This is a picture of my dragon toe agave. It sent out a long underground stem, and the pup popped out of the ground a fair distance from the mother plant. So this one was fairly easy to pull out of the ground. And as you can see, it already has several small roots of its own. In this case, since the pup had roots, it could be planted right away. Here's a different situation. On the left is a picture of a foxtail pushing out a new pup. But this pup is attached to the base of the mother plant. In a situation like this, you may have to cut the pup away with a large knife or a shovel and try to cut as close to the base as possible without injuring the mother plant. I got really excited when I first noticed this pup and tried to separate it without digging up and disturbing the mother plant too much. And I was kind of mangling it, trying to grab the pup and twist it out. But I have learned that it's better to wait until the pup gets larger and starts to develop its own root system. When it got to be this size, I just cleared the earth away from the base and was able to twist and gently pull it out. It's important to get at least a little bit of the mother plant. And in this situation, you could see that it's already got a small little root, so it could be planted right away. April and May is the easiest time to pull out the pups because the ground is soft. On the left, you can see all the little pups hiding under those lethal terminal spines of my cream spike. I managed to harvest these five healthy pups, but it was tricky. This is a very petite, small, miniature plant. It's 5 years old and it's just 9 inches across. And it was the first year it produced pups. First, I loosened the plant a little bit with a trowel. Then I used these chopsticks to clear away as much soil as I needed to expose the pups. And I used the chopsticks to grasp the pup and twist and gently pull it out. And I didn't even get stabbed. It is possible to snip off the terminal spines, that is the little sharp pointy things at the end of the leaves, in order to prevent getting stabbed, but I didn't like to ruin the integrity of the plant. Here's another situation. Here's a cutting that does not have a root. As you can see, it was on a long underground stem, but I intentionally cut it off without any roots just for this demonstration. In this case, since it has no roots, you would leave it out for a few days, not in the direct sunlight, just somewhere in sort of a partly shady area, and leave it out for a few days till it calluses over, and then you can put it in the ground. And it normally will take 2 to 3 weeks for roots to develop. When growing agave cuttings, it's best to keep the potting mix damp, but not overly moist while it becomes established. This brings us to the subject of maintenance. One of the best things about agave is that they require so little maintenance. I think those teeth and terminal spines are nature's way of saying, leave me alone. It is important, however, to keep the rosettes clean of leaves, acorns, and other debris. Rosettes grow from the center, so the outer leaves at the base of the plant eventually shrivel up and die. And the best way to remove these dried up basal leaves is at this situation, you can trim off the terminal spine and the teeth along the edges of the dried leaf, making it a lot easier to handle. You won't damage your hands. Snip into one side of the leaf as close to the base as possible, and then wiggle that leaf back and forth, all the while pulling it out. If you have a very broadleaf plant, though, you may have to use a hand saw. And once again, try to cut as close as possible to the base without injuring the heart of the plant. It's fine to cut damaged leaves, but this should be done in a thoughtful way. Cutting the leaf in a V shape or straight across the leaf, in my opinion, is not very pleasing. The top right picture shows a foxtail whose leaves have been damaged by extreme heat. The result is called corking. And below, you can see that the leaves have been trimmed in a shape that is more in line with the natural shape of the leaf. It is not recommended to prune when it's really hot, that is, hotter than 85 degrees. The best time to prune is March through September. It's also okay to trim off the terminal spines. If somebody has small pets or small children that tend to play in the garden, for safety reasons, by all means, they want to cut off those sharp little spiky points at the end of the leaves, it does not harm the plant. Here are some useful tools for taking care of your agave plant. Starting from the right, for the larger plants, you'll need a saw to remove those basal leaves. A water meter is handy to test your soil's moisture level. Hand pruners for removing leaves off the small plants. I use soft paintbrushes for gently sweeping the leaves clean. Chopsticks and tweezers for getting in between those leaves to remove the debris. A master gardener colleague of mine put me onto these giant tweezers that I just love, and it saves my hands from getting all kinds of stabs. It's a good idea to have a bottle of alcohol to keep your tools clean. Pour it into a spray bottle and just spray it on your tools and wipe them off with a rag. A small trowel for removing the pups. And of course, nice thick gloves. Many agave have toxins in them, and you may have a reaction if stabbed. Protective glasses are also a good idea. If you're bending down, kneeling over one of these horrida agaves or any other kind with those teeth or terminal spines, you wouldn't want to get poked in the eye. Spring is a great time for removing pups. The ground is soft and it's the beginning of the growing season, so it's a good time to replant those pups wherever you want. Or if you get out there today, not today, but tomorrow or Saturday morning, you can bring your pups to our succulent swap at the library on Saturday. I pull the pups out all year long whenever I see them. If you don't stay on top of it, it can become quite a big job. Now, what about watering? I bet you're thinking, please just tell me how much water and how often. Well, I wish it would be that simple. Watering depends on many factors. the species of the plant, the soil type, the temperature, the amount of light, whether it's in a pot or in the ground, it all makes a difference. And there are species at either end of the watering requirements. The majority will grow best when given some supplemental water during their growing seasons. Agaves have a shallow, extensive root system, so it's best to soak an area 3 to 4 feet, 3 to 4 feet times the width of the plant to a depth of 1 to 2 feet, and then allow that soil to totally dry out. Keep standing water away from the center of the rosette all year round in order to minimize the possibility of crown root. For plants in full sun, keep water off the leaf surfaces, especially during the middle of the day. Water can act like a magnifying glass, causing burns on the leaves, particularly on broad-leafed species. Get to know your plant. I always take a picture when I first buy a plant and put it in the ground. How does it look now? How much has it grown? Has it lost its sheen? Do the leaves still look plump and healthy? If it's looking healthy, don't water yet. The most common problem with succulents is overwatering. This Queen Victoria was starting to look a little yellow when the daily rains started last fall. I noticed she wasn't quite looking her perky self, and so I improvised and made this rain bonnet. And I keep trying to take it off, and every day when it says clouds only, it's still raining. So she still has her bonnet on, and she's looking terrific. Her roots still get some moisture, but she's protected from the heavy downpours. As I said, know your plants, know what they can tolerate. I go out every morning with my second cup of coffee and do my ritual morning garden inspection. To fertilize, that is the question. Agave grow in remote mountains, desert-like conditions. They really don't need to be fertilized. However, if you insist, you can use a general 10-10-10 in the beginning of their spring growing season, just to get them started. And it's often advised to mix it 1/2 strength. They also do not need organic, rich soil, so don't mulch with compost. Just a word on sunlight requirements. Most agave do best with at least 6 hours of sunlight. I've mentioned a few species along the way that are shade tolerant. So that's the foxtail and the bracteosa. Before you put your new plant into the ground, check for this guy. The agave weevil is one of the few pests you'll need to be concerned about. It's about 1 inch long, so you can easily see him with the naked eye. The weevil does not fly. The only way he'll get into your garden is by crawling over to your place or by hitchhiking on a new plant that you're bringing in. So inspect your plants carefully. Check for puncture marks near the center core. Once the weevil buries into the core, it secretes a bacteria that destroys the plant. In that case, you should remove that plant quickly, and if it's in a pot, replace the soil also. The weevil's favorite agave is the Americana. It tends to stay away from plants with soft leaves like the attenuata, and it doesn't like plants with slender, non-juicy leaves like the filifera or the bracteosa. And it also stays away from plants with tough, hard-to-pierce leaves like the Perry and the Queen Victoria. About the only other pest that bothers the agave are gophers. They love to chew on the roots. Good drainage is very important for agave. You may test your soil's drainage by digging a planting hole. Fill it with water and see how long it takes to drain. If the water is gone within half an hour, you should be fine. It's also best to plant agaves on a slope or on top of a mound so that the water naturally runs off. Do not plant in a low area where water will collect. So dig a hole about twice as wide as the pot, but the same depth of the pot. Only if your drainage is poor. Dig 18 inches deeper and fill that 18 inches with a mixture of 1/4 inch lava rock and native soil. This is important because lava rock will not decompose and the plant will not settle below the desired level. You would not want to fill the space below the plant with store-bought succulent soil because that will decompose and deflate. In general, agave are much more tolerant of clay soil than other succulents, as long as you make sure that the drainage is good. Now we're going to talk about a little history. The agave is an ancient plant species dating back thousands of years. It is a New World plant, though, originating in Mexico, Central America, the northern part of South America, and the Southwest US. It has been and continues to be an important source of food, fencing, rope, medicine, and liquor for the Mexican people. We'll talk about the Aztec culture and how they used the agave and how the agave was introduced to Europe. And we'll also cover the topic you've all been waiting for, tequila. A lot is known about the importance of agave to the Aztec people who ruled from 1300 to 1520. Their goddess, Mayahul, as depicted here, represented fertility and life. She is also known as the goddess of the 400 breasts, which probably reference the many sprouts of agave and the milky sap that it produces. The sap was used in religious ceremonies. The agave has many uses. From its leaves, the people obtained fibers to make ropes, textiles, sandals, construction materials, and fuel. The agave heart, the plant's above-ground storage organ, contains carbohydrates and is edible by humans. The stems of the leaves were used to make small tools, such as needles. The flower stalks were used as posts and in building homes. The ancient Maya, who lived before the Aztec Empire, used the agave spines as perforators during their bloodletting rituals, and had actually domesticated certain varieties. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they reported a particular agave species was being grown in house gardens and was much better quality than that in the wild. Here's a list of many different agave cultivars and their primary uses. I can't pronounce all the names, but you can see some of their primary uses were for fiber, others were for food, and others were for sweet sap. The sweet sap is called aguamiel, or honey water in Spanish. It is a milky substance. When fermented, it makes a mildly alcoholic beverage called pulque. It is believed that both aguamiel and pulque are both very good for the digestive system and for gut health in general. Mature agaves also provide food. The leaves are cut off near their bases, leaving a cabiza head, resembling a giant pineapple, which can weigh up to 70 pounds. The cabizas, are also called piñas, are roasted in a pit and eaten during fiestas. The raw flesh of many agaves is caustic and can cause skin ulcers, and so must be roasted or cooked in some way before eaten. Here's a picture of a damaged leaf, and you can see how fibrous it is. You can see how they would be able to make ropes and sandals and such from there. Of all the cultivated plants, none are more difficult to name accurately than the species of agave. This is a quote from the 1880s by a British botanist. Agaves were introduced into the European gardens in the late 1700s. Many of the plants were sent from Mexico with very little information about locality and origin. Plants were often sent to multiple botanists at the same time, each of them assigning a different name, resulting in plants often having multiple names. In 1915, a German botanist named Elwin Berger published a book about agave, and he described 274 species. 77 years later, a big change took place when an American man named Howard Gentry published a monumental book titled The Agave of Continental North America. So Gentry spent nearly 50 years, that's 50 years, of extensive field work collecting and researching the agave species. He recognized the many duplications over the years and reduced the number of known agave species to 136. So he basically cut the number by half. Since that time, with new roads into more remote areas of Mexico, researchers have discovered new species. But confusion still exists, even with common names. Growers label their plants with catchy common names, resulting in additional confusion. For example, attenuata is commonly known as foxtail, or sometimes lion's tail, or sometimes swan's neck. Bracteosa is known as calamar or green spider. Gemini flora is known as twin flower or spaghetti strap. And the word mugue means agave in Spanish. And many different cultivars are simply called mugue or mugue verde or mugue pulque. Specifically, the agave americana, the most common century plant, is simply known as mugue. Finally, we're going to talk about tequila and the other beverages made from agave. Actually, the sop, aqua meal, deserves a lot more explanation. The process for extracting the sap is quite involved. With all the automation and mass production that has been happening, the Mexican farmers feared that the diversity of the agave and the cultural practices would disappear. So in 2016, hundreds of small-scale producers from the Mexican plateau formed a slow food presidium to preserve the maguey's biodiversity and culture. They planted 20,000 pulquero plants, maguey pulquero plants, and interplanted them with other crops. Agua meal is now harvested through an ancient, very intricate and sustainable process, which is preserved by the slow food presidium. And here's that intricate tradition. The Salminiana agave is the best variety for sap, and it's commonly called the green giant agave. And you can see by the size here why they call it the green giant. The agave plant must be between 10 and 12 years old. The first step is to remove some of the top leaves and cut a cavity in the piña and remove the plant's core. The cavity is then left to rest for 6 months, during which time it calluses over. After that 6 months have passed, the wound is opened again and left for another 8 days. Then the wound is scratched with a special tool to stimulate the production of the agua meal. By the next morning, the cavity is filled with sap. The sap is siphoned into a gourd. That scraping and siphoning will continue for the next 3 to 4 months until the plant dies. And here's the gourd that they siphon the sap into. And here are the tools for that intricate ancient method. Here's the gourd that the sap is siphoned into. This spear-like tool is used to cut the cavity, the initial cavity, and in the forefront is the special scraping tool. A plant can produce up to 10 liters of sap per day, which amounts to approximately 1,000 or 1,500 liters per plant before it dies. We've already talked about pulque. It's fermented agua meal, the sap of the agave. In Aztec times, it was used primarily in religious ceremonies and for medicinal purposes. It has the color of milk, a rather thick, sticky substance, and a sour yeast-like taste. Today, everyone in Mexico drinks pulque. It's part of the diet. It's not to get drunk. It's simply a food. It's an important probiotic with 36 different types of microorganisms. A few companies have pasteurized and flavored it. The sap is also distilled into a beverage.
It should be done at 8.
Pulcata, which is very different. Well, do you guys want to hear about tequila or not? Like French champagne, mezcal and tequila must be made in Mexico. The word mezcal translates into cooked agave. Basically, it's any agave-based spirit, but it must be made in Mexico. Tequila is much more specific. It must be made from the Blue Weber variety and in the Mexican state of Jalisco. Mezcal is often described as smoky, whereas tequila is spicy. And this is what the Blue Weber agave looks like. This is how, and I'm speeding up here. This is how they harvest. A piña can weigh up to 70 pounds. And for mezcal, in order to get that smoky character, the piñas are roasted in an underground oven. And for tequila, the piñas are steamed in a brick oven. And then the cooked piñas are then mashed to obtain agave juice that is rich in sugar. And the juice is then fermented, distilled, flavored, and bottled. And 15 pounds of piña makes 1 liter of tequila. And this is the end, coming back full circle to the beautiful cream spike to remind us of the beauty and diversity of the agave species. I hope this presentation has tweaked your interest and that you will experiment with some of the new varieties in your garden. Here's a list of my references, and I just want to point out that I have made the link to San Marcos Growers in red because it is just a great resource. Under each agave species or variety, there's a ton of information. And just finally, I wanted to share with you that I took my research very seriously, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. This recording will be found on our website. Here's the name of the website. And when you get on our homepage, you just scroll down to the tile that said past programs and events. It's 8 o'clock exactly, guys. I'm done. And if there are any questions, we'll entertain. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, of course you do. Olga, that was fantastic. The one burning question from Pat H was, how do the solitary plants reproduce? And I tried to answer it, and I think I blew it. I said sexually by seed, I believe,
They
but perhaps you can elucidate.
they can propagate by seed, and also they can do, in the labs, they can do cuttings and, complicated things like that, but basically by seed.
Okay. And Penny said maybe they're like tomatoes, self-pollination. So, I don't know if some of them have perfect flowers or not, when they actually effloresce. But presumably birds and bees.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay. I don't see any. You got lots of people saying thank you. And people seem to really like it. Everybody's probably off having a shot of tequila right now.